Well, good morning. My name is Mark Zeiler, and I lead the young adult ministry here. We have a service on Thursday nights at 7:30. So if you are in your 20s or 30s, come check us out. We'd love to meet you. I was asked recently, why does it seem like all the pastors and ministers at this church are bald except for Brad? And I think I have the answer, is that out of all of us, Brad has spent the least amount of time in youth ministry. So, what you will. I am excited to be here with you this morning to take on our next passage in Genesis. But I will warn you, this passage, some will say, is one of the most controversial passages, not only in Genesis, but in the whole Bible. And it's a hard passage. So if you guys have any really difficult questions that come up that you're thinking about, please feel free to email me at bradthomas@austinridge.org. Just kidding, you can email me. I'd love to talk with you about it. I've loved this Genesis series. It's kind of taken me back to when I was in the 8th grade. I had a basketball coach in the 8th grade that came to me once and told me, Mark, if you really want to be a good basketball player, if you want to be a good leader, you need to read your Bible. And I was like, okay, really? All right, I'll try it out. And so I cracked open Genesis, and I had never read it for myself. And I began to read the book of Genesis for what it was, and I was shocked. I was captivated too. You see, I had grown up in the church, and so my impression of Genesis was completely based on the whole Sunday school experience, where you have oddly shaped cookies, watered down juice, puppets. And to me, Genesis was this book of a lot of smiling animals, like Adam and Eve, a bunch of smiling animals, and strategically placed fig leaves and branches to cover up what was going on or what wasn't going on. And then even Noah's Ark. What's Noah's Ark? A bunch of more smiling animals getting on a boat. There's a rainbow. It's this nice, happy place. And God, to me, was this kind of nice, loving, benevolent grandfather who made people's lives more convenient. So when I began to read it for myself, and I see stories that are in this book, like Noah's Ark. Yes, God saves Noah's Ark, or he saves Noah and his family and a bunch of animals, but everybody else dies. Everybody else dies. And then I got to the story that we're going to be looking at this morning, the beginning of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and I remember looking at this book and thinking, what is this book? And where's all the basketball at? And when I encounter this story, it's some crazy stuff. And if you just take a casual look at the Bible, just a casual look, it provokes you to ask the question, who is this God? And what is he doing? And why does he do the things that he does? And this morning, I hope that you see through this passage that God is not just, and I don't want to make light of his grace and his mercy and his love at all. I don't want to make light of that. But he is not just loving and merciful and gracious. He's not just this benevolent being. He is also holy, he is just, and he is a warrior. And when we look at this passage, we're going to see that he is holy and just, and that he is also merciful. So let's check it out. It's Genesis chapter 18, verse 16 to 33. I'm going to read it to you. Verse 16. When the men got up to leave, they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised." Then the Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know." The men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Now, it's important to understand that the thing that provokes this whole event, God coming down, investigating Sodom, is these two words in verse 20 and 21, outcry and grievous. One, outcry. What is this outcry? Outcry in the Hebrew is the word for the cry of the oppressed and the brutalized. It is the cry of the oppressed and the brutalized. The other thing is that this word grievous, that whatever is going on in Sodom is causing what the word means, grief in the heart of God. He is feeling grief over what is happening in this city. So what do we see? What are they doing that's creating this injustice that causes this outcry and this grievousness for God? One, moral depravity, total moral depravity. As we will see next week, when Brad continues on with this passage, there's a part of what happens when these two angels go to visit Sodom. When they go into the city, it says that all the men, both young and old, come to physically abuse and brutalize and even rape these two men. And we're talking about all the men. So young kids, junior high, high school, college, middle-aged men, and senior citizens, all of them show up. This place is completely morally decadent. And evil and wickedness has reached every person in it, and it has perverted it. But at the same time, it's not just moral depravity. As Ezekiel chapter 16, 49 and 50 say, there is also great social injustice. Ezekiel 16, 49 and 50 says this, "And this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughter," which is referring to Gomorrah, "had three things: pride, excess of food, more food than they needed, and prosperous ease, comfortable ease, the conveniences of the day." And at the same time, when they had all those things, it goes on to say they neglected to aid the poor and the needy. They neglected to aid the poor and the needy. And when I saw their arrogance, it was an abomination to me. And when I saw it, I removed them. I removed them from the earth. Two things that are going on here. One, total moral depravity, and two, social injustice. They had more than they needed. They had comfortable ease, and they didn't do anything to help the cities around them, the poor people around them, the other cities that had need. They didn't do anything to help them. They ignored them. They rejected them. And God saw it, and he brought judgment upon them. He brought harsh judgment upon them. He removed them from the earth. Why would God do such a thing? Essentially, because God is holy and he is just. When we say that God is holy, what we mean is that he is perfect and excellent in purity. Excellent in purity. Without sin, without blemish, he is majestic. And out of his holiness flows a hatred for sin, a hatred for evil. Not because it's just this arbitrary, kind of out of control anger or hatred, but because sin and evil, he knows, destroys that which he loves. It destroys his creation. It destroys the shalom on the earth that he desires for all people. Not to trivialize sin, but my wife and I, Megan, one thing that we hate is onions. We actually hate onions. So when we go to eat somewhere, we will be very aggressive about making sure people don't put onions in the food. There was one time where I spent like maybe 15 minutes like picking through a salad, taking out all the onions for my wife. Now, is it just because we have this arbitrary hate for onions? No, it's because we love something else. We love food. Food is good. We like food. And when something destroys the food, it causes a hatred for that thing. God's hatred for sin and evil is not just arbitrary kind of aggressive craziness. No, it's because he loves his creation. He loves what he has made and he calls it good, and he doesn't want anything to destroy it. My friend and I, when we were a little kid, we found out one of the places that injustice really shows up in our culture today, and it's through something called a blanket fort. You guys ever seen these before? You take some blankets and you strap them up around the house, and you get some pillows and you make little rooms and different things. We would make some crazy blanket forts. This one time we made the mother of all blanket forts. And what did we do? We made this huge blanket fort, but we went into the pantry and we got as much food as we could. And we brought all the food and we packed this blanket fort full of food. Not only that, we even began to steal resources from the environment around us. We took a sheet and we hooked it up to the air conditioning vent and we brought it down into the blanket fort because those things get hot. And so we brought that thing down and all this air was just rushing down, and this was the coldest blanket fort ever. I mean, this thing was freezing cold in there. We had this food. We were hoarding wealth. We were hoarding resources. We were taking it all, but we were still missing something. What we needed was a slave. And we knew the perfect person, John's little sister, Julia. So what do? We go get a blanket. We take this blanket, our toy guns, some bandanas, and we go marching out there to the trampoline. We sneak around, we jump, we pounce, we capture her, we bring her in. And as we bring her in, guess what there was? An outcry. She was crying out. She was being oppressed. She was being held captive. And guess who heard her outcry? Her father, Jim. Jim comes barreling down the stairs. I'll never forget his face. He was angry. He was upset. And he came to bring justice to this situation. He took his daughter back. He took all the food back. He destroyed the tent. He ripped down the thing and was like, no wonder it was so hot upstairs. And he brought justice to this place. Now, was his anger and his movement to come and to get rid of us and to move us, change things up? Was it just he was just angry out of nowhere? No. It was for the cry of the oppressed. It was for someone that was hurting and in need. Guys, I sometimes wonder, when I read this passage this week, I had heard about the decadence of Sodom, and I had never heard that passage on Ezekiel. I had totally missed that there was not just moral kind of failure here, but there was they were ignoring the needs of the cities around them. They were hoarding wealth, and it was extremely convicting. You guys know, we live in a culture, we have so much stuff. What has caused all this crazy imbalance in the world? The answer at its simplest form is sin. It's sin. The other day, I was at the grocery store, and I was thinking about this message and God's justice and Him, and I started to have this weird thing where I was like, I wonder what I would do differently at the grocery store right now if I didn't believe God existed. If I didn't think He existed, or if I just didn't think He was just. What would I do differently here? So I started to think about it. And I was like, for one, I'd probably try to steal some stuff. Why not? What do I have to lose? If there is no God, if there is no judgment, if there is no one out there above me more powerful than me to hold me accountable, why would I not just steal some things? And then I began to think, what else I would probably do? I probably would not resist in any way, shape, or form, looking lustfully at the women around me. Why not? Eat, drink, and be merry. Just have fun. Just enjoy. Just indulge. And you see, what I realized was, in the end, I would live without regard for the people around me. I would live without regard for the people around me. And guys, we have a world filled with people. And a lot of us don't live with regard for the people, we live without regard for the people around us. And there are still outcries today. There is an outcry of hunger. There are 800 million people under the basic level of calorie intake to be a healthy basic person. 800 million. That's as many people as in America and the 28 states in the European Union combined. Every 11 seconds, a child dies of hunger. That's mind-blowing. There is an outcry of sex trafficking. The average, according to Shared Hope Alliance, in America, the average age a girl is abducted into the sex trade in America is 12 to 14 years old. This is an outcry. There's an outcry of orphans. In America, there's over 400,000 children that do not live with permanent parents. They move from one house to the next, so they live in some type of orphanage or home. Over 400,000. You just think about how many empty rooms we might even have in this community. Just empty rooms with parents who could provide a home. You just begin to think about that, and there's an outcry there. In Job 29, we see a clear picture of what justice looks like in the positive form. In the negative form, it punishes sin and hates sin. In the positive form, it's Job 29. He talks about how he is clothed with righteousness. Before he suffered, he describes himself as clothed with righteousness, robed with justice. And then he describes what that looks like. And he describes it like this. He says, 1, I delivered the poor and the needy. I put a song in the heart of the widow. I gave feet to the lame and eyes to the blind. He cared for the physically disabled. And he was a father to the fatherless. And he broke the fangs of the oppressor. He did what was necessary to stop injustice. Just previously, Abraham had a meal with Jesus and these two angels. And here they are, and they're walking, and they look down towards Sodom. And Jesus says to the two angels, it's kind of peculiar. He says to them, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? It's kind of weird. Like, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? I mean, imagine I'm standing with two neighbors, and I hear one neighbor say, shall I hide from Mark what I'm about to do to Bob's house? And I'd be like, no, you shouldn't. Well, what are you going to do? You know, it would cause me to move in. He'd be provoking me. What is God doing here? He's provoking Abraham. He's provoking him to see not only his justice, but his concern for the poor, the outcry that's happening. He's engaging with him. He's bringing him in. And what is this whole business about him even having to come down and see what's going on? I mean, God's all-knowing. He knows everything. He sees everything. He's everywhere. He's God. He's the creator of the universe. Why would he need to come down and look? He knows. Purely for the reason that he wants Abraham to be engaged. He's engaging Abraham. He's bringing a person, his man, into the situation. Because people, we are God's primary means to spread justice on this earth. We are his primary means. People, humans, us. And he's bringing Abraham in. He's engaging with him, drawing him in. He wants to warn Abraham of his judgment. He wants to warn Abraham of his judgment. 2 Peter 2:6 and Jude 1:7 both you talk about Sodom as an example and a warning. They are an example of a warning of the judgment of God. And God in this dialogue with Abraham is even saying, you're the blessing of the nations that I'm going to use you to bless the nations, and my promise that I've made to you, a part of that blessing, of you being a blessing of the nations, is you knowing about my justice. You knowing about who I am and what I do, and that I hate sin and evil, and there will be punishment and consequences for sin and evil. And he's inviting him in to show him this and reveal this to him. Warning someone about something is a very loving thing to do. Like to warn someone. I mean, think about parents with little kids. How much time do you spend warning them about, well, if you do this, this will happen. If you don't do this, this will happen. Warning. God is warning Abraham about something he needs to know about. I was watching this blog, and it was a video of this guy, Penn Jillette from Penn and Teller. It's really interesting. He had done a show, and he had performed his magician deal, and it was over, and some guy came backstage, and the guy said was nicely dressed, and he had a Bible with him, and he walked up to him, and he genuinely approached him, conversed with him, talked to him, handed him the Bible, and kind of witnessed to him. It was kind of like, hey, I'm a Christian, and, talk to him about it. And Penn, he says he's an atheist, and he's an agnostic, and that's not for him. But you know what he said about it? He said, I really respected this guy. Like, I really respected that he was willing to engage with me and talk with me because he believes in a hell. He believes in that. And then he said, you know what I don't respect? He said, this is just what he said, I have no respect for someone who believes without a shadow of a doubt that there is such a thing as hell, but then doesn't initiate with people, engage with people because it's socially awkward. He says, how much do you have to hate somebody to not talk to them when you actually believe that? And he doesn't believe it, but he's making an observation about us. He said, and then he said this, he said, if I'm on the side of the road and I see a guy and there's a truck coming and I know without a shadow of a doubt this truck is going to hit the guy, but he doesn't believe it, he doesn't agree with it, at some point I'm going to tackle the guy. Now I'm not suggesting we all leave here and tackle people, for the glory of God, because, engaging with the lost world, with people who don't believe what we believe, it is an art, it takes work, it takes effort, it takes engagement. But guys, what we see here is God's heart to love us, to love the world by warning us, by letting us know what's coming. Now, some of you might be sitting here hearing this, and you think, yeah, like even the part about helping the oppressed and all the needs out in the world, that's cool. But like this whole part about God being a judge and judging people and like holding people to a standard, I don't know if that's for me. I don't know if I believe in that kind of God. I just want to submit this to you. Be very careful how you go about deciding who God is and who God is not. Be very careful how you do that. I was at Zilker Park the other day, and I'm coming out of it, and I'm going to my car. And I had this weird experience. I look, and I see this guy, and he was homeless. And I guess he was homeless because of the way that he dressed. And, maybe that's a bad thing to do, but I saw him, and he's walking along. And I just had this overwhelming sense. I don't normally do this kind of thing, and I just thought, I think I need to take this guy to lunch. So I kind of yelled at him from across the way because I tell he's moving fast. So I was like, hey, buddy. And I'm like, what am I doing? And then he looks over at me. He's like, hey. And I'm like, you want to go to lunch? And he's like, yeah. And then he's like, can I invite my brother? And I'm like, sure. And so I'm wondering if he was watching this, And so then he whistles. He's like, whistles, and this random dude over like across the hill just kind of pops up, And he's like, hey, this guy's gonna take us to lunch. And he's like, yeah, awesome. And he picks up these 2 big bags of cans and he starts running over, And I pop my trunk open. We throw these cans in here. We get in the car. We're going. I'm like, what do you guys want to eat? And they're like, steak dinner sounds great, And I'm like, oh, how about barbecue? So we go to this place, Green Mesquite, and we sit there and we just start talking. And this guy on the left is really interesting. The guy on the left, I say to him, so you guys are brothers? You don't look like brothers. And his response is, oh, well, we're brothers in a spiritual sense. And I was like, oh, cool, you're spiritual. What do you mean when you say that you're spiritual? And he says, well, I believe God is everything. God is the trees, God is the rocks, God is the park, he's the sky, he's whatever you want him to be. I'm like, okay, what about you? What do you think? And he says, well, he pulls out this piece of wood, right? And he just puts this wood right on my face, like right here. And he's like, what is this? I was like, I don't know. I thought he was looking for some deep meaning. And he was like, it's a piece of wood. And I was like, yeah, it is a piece of wood, that's right. And then he puts the wood back in his pocket and he looks at me. I mean, he's as serious as a heart attack. He's got me zoned in. And he's like, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am nothing. And then he continues to quote 1 Corinthians chapter 13, word perfect, the whole thing, which is a chapter about love. I'm just sitting there like, and he says, God is love. And I'm like, cool, yeah, that's awesome. And I was like, you used to be a pastor or something? And he's like, no, I just like memorizing things. And so it's like, cool. These 2 guys represented the 2 primary ways our city approaches deciding who God is. On the left, you have the way that says, I'm going to decide who God is however I want. Whoever I believe that he is, that's who he is. The one on the right, he didn't say these words, but his approach to God is an objective reality. He's an objective reality, and no matter what I do, I can't decide who he is. He is who he is, and I must discover who he is through who he reveals to be in his word. Guys, God is an objective reality. I believe God is an objective reality. If he truly exists, you can't make him into whatever you want him to be. If I really exist, if I'm really standing up here right now, and you see me, and you believe I exist and I'm here, I can't be whatever you want me to be. If over here someone says, well, I think Mark's 200 pounds, 6'3", and another person says, well, I think Mark's 150 pounds, 6 foot. You both can't be right. You both can't be right. Either one of you is right or neither of you is right. Who God reveals himself to be in his word is a God of justice, holiness, and he holds us accountable for our sin. and he hates sin and evil. And as Romans 1 shows us, when we take our view of God and we try to make him into whoever we want him to be, when we exchange the truth about God for a lie, and we decide for ourselves who he is, he gives us over to our passions. This word passion in the Greek in Romans 1 is this word epithumia, which means over desire. You see, we are made to desire God and long for God and want God and know him. And when we don't see the real God and know him and experience him, we are left with an over desire in our heart. And we can never have enough. We need more and more and more stuff and more this and that. And we look for new experiences and new indulgences, and we just get a downward spiral where we get worse and worse and worse. And when you have a whole culture who does this, you get to a place, as we see what happened with Sodom, they get to a place where God looks at them and it is an abomination to him. And he says, I will remove them. I removed them. It gets to a point where God says, enough is enough. How do we respond? Well, Abraham pleads for God to be merciful. He pleads for God in the midst of his justice to be merciful. He says, then Abraham approached him, and the approach is like a legal approach, like a mediator, like a lawyer, and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? See what he's at? He's coming to God. I mean, he's coming hot. He's coming angry. He's encountering God's justice, and it is creating some serious conflict in his mind and his heart. And he's saying, God, what if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Would you be willing to spare the whole place? Because there's 50 righteous people there. And God says to him, yes. Yes. So Abraham's got his foot in the door. You can see, let's see how far I can get with this. And so his next question is, would you be willing to spare the whole city if there are 45 people, righteous people in the city? And God says, yes, if there are 45 righteous people in the city, I will spare it. 40. Yes. And then he kind of backs up a little bit, and he's like, I'm only dust and ashes. Okay, I'm only dust and ashes. Don't get angry with me. But I'm going to keep going with this here. All right, we're going to keep going. How about 30? It's like he's bargaining in a market. And God's like, if there are 30 righteous people in the city, I will spare it. What about 20? Yes. 10? Yes. And then it abruptly ends. It ends, which is really peculiar. Why does it end? And then, well, what is Abraham asking here, essentially? Let me get into this for a second. First, think about and notice what he's not asking. What is he not asking here? One, he's not asking that God would ignore the wickedness. Hey, why don't we just let it go? Let it go, Let's just let the sin go, brush it under the rug, and forget about it. Let's just move on. We don't have to kill people here. He doesn't ask that. He also doesn't ask for God to go in and say, hey, let's just go in and save the 50 righteous people. Let's just pull them out and then kill the rest of them. He's not asking that either. Abraham is asking for God to spare the whole place. What he is asking is this: God, are you merciful enough to let the righteousness of the few serve to count, to cover the wickedness of the many? Does this sound familiar yet? It's coming. Are you willing to let the righteousness of the few serve to cover the wickedness of the many? And the answer is yes. He is willing to do that. He is merciful enough to do that. But when he goes to Sodom, what does he find? He finds what Romans 3 and Psalm 23 confirm. There is no one righteous, not even one. No one seeks for God. No one understands. Together they have become worthless. Not one of us has enough righteousness. We don't have enough. No one did then. No one does now. We don't have enough righteousness as humans to cover the sins of others. And when the angels go there, as you'll see next week, God is merciful enough to save Abraham's family. And he rescues Lot and his family out. But then he rains down fire. And the next day, Abraham wakes up, and the story ends with he sees a pillar of smoke coming up. And he gets a very hardcore lesson that no one is righteous enough. And Abraham already knows. He knows that God gave him the gift of righteousness as a gift, not because of what he ever did or ever would do. It was a gift. And this was a lesson on God's judgment. I kind of wonder when I read this story, what if Abraham had asked, could the righteousness of one serve to cover the wickedness of the many? And I believe the New Testament confirms, yes, he would be willing to do that. And he has. And the ironic thing is the person that Abraham is talking to, who we have established we think is the pre-incarnate Jesus, it's Jesus that he's talking to, who he's having this conversation with, is the man who would come, who would live the perfect life, who would live a righteous enough life to be the one, and he dies on the cross, he is buried, he comes back from the dead, so that now we can look back, and when we believe, we can know that he who knew no sin became sin on our behalf so that we might become the righteousness of God. So that we might become the righteousness of God. You see, on the cross, God's justice and his grace and his mercy collided. Sin must be punished. Sin must be dealt with. He cannot let it go. He is a just judge. We are all so bad that Jesus had to die. Why did he have to die? Because we were that bad. But his love is so great and so awesome and so amazing that he was glad to die for us, to bring us into his family, to call us his own, so that now when we believe in him and we trust in him and we have faith in him, we can know and have confidence that he looks at us and he says, I love you, my child. We are no longer enemies, we are children, adopted in. We were helpless orphans who could do nothing. And he gave everything to adopt us into his family. What do? How do we respond to this? We do the same. We look at Jesus and realize he was in a place that was an abundance of food, comfortable ease, but he did not have pride. He had humility, so he was willing to come down out of heaven onto earth to empty himself, to empty his blood, to let his body be broken for us so that we would see it and we would be inspired to do what he's done and be people of justice, who seek to help the poor, who seek to adopt the orphans, to do things, to spread the gospel, and to rescue people from oppression. God's mission primarily is to advance the gospel, but around the gospel comes this idea of justice that says, let's change the world. Let's change this place. Let's be the salt of the earth that preserves the moral integrity of this earth. Let's be light. Let's be holy in our personal lives and our minds. Let's seek holiness. But let's also be just and look for ways to rescue people physically, tangibly. I just want to leave you with this question. What are you doing? What are you doing? Justice implies action. It implies action. And I don't ask you that to make you feel bad. I hope you feel good. I hope you hear that and you think, I want to do something. I want to give my life for something. I want to make a difference. I want to change the world. Coming into Christianity is basically an invitation to say, join us. Let's change the world. Let's make this world a better place for everyone. Imagine if somebody came up to you and gave you a cure for cancer. And they said, here it is. This is it. We figured it out. But for some reason, we're just going to give it to you and no one else is going to know about it. So it's all on you. What would you do? my best guess is that many of you would go all out. You would go all out. You say, all chips on the table. All the money I have, all chips on the table. All the time I have, putting it all out there. My energy, my learning, it's all out here. I'm going to use all my gifts, all my resources. I'm going to do everything I can to help get this cure out there to save lives. What we believe is that the problem of sin is a much worse issue than cancer. There's people with cancer who have joy because they have the gospel. All our bodies are going to die physically and then be resurrected physically, which is awesome. Guys, God has entrusted us with the gospel, and he desires to spread his shalom, his peace on the earth, and the gospel is the primary means through which it goes forth. What will you do? Let me pray. Lord, I come to you and with my friends here, and you are judge of all the earth. And who are we to even speak to you? We are dust and ashes. We are but a breath. We're a vapor. But Lord, while we have this kind of breath in the air of our life and this vapor kind of floating across the sky, only to be gone in a short time, Lord, we want the short time that we have here on earth to count. We don't want to waste our lives. I pray for my friends here. I pray for myself. Show us, what do we do? What's the next step? What do we do? There's some here who might be thinking, I need to step up and serve. I pray you'd move them to do it. In your name, amen.